Welcome to K-Pastors Roundtable. I'm your host, Alex. Today, we have Steve Chang, Senior Pastor of Living Hope Community Church. He's involved in something called Sola Network Council, and he's one of the co-founders of the Sola Group. Welcome back, Pastor.
Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for having me.
Is that Sola initial or is it a...
It's in reference to the Reformation.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about what that is about Sola Network?
You know, we began about 7 years ago when our college pastors were talking and decided to maybe do something together.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided to hold a conference. And actually what came out of that is not only the college pastors working together, but the senior pastors saying, you know, in order to provide structure and support, we need to cooperate. And so we eventually organized Sola Network.
Okay.
And we got senior leaders together, and that became the council. And the college pastors, they became the executive team. It transformed now, and it's become a lot more complex, in which we have 10 senior pastors from across the country,
Right.
Asian Americans, a lot of Korean Americans, though, and they represent the council.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a team that's conference planning team, or the conference team.
Yes.
And it's no longer just college kids that we're targeting or trying to draw to. And that particular conference, called the Sola Conference, has become a conference in which we are trying to frame the gospel for the emerging generation of Asian Americans.
Okay.
And that's been a real blessing. We eventually started a website to provide content. That's been going on for 2 years, and we have an article up almost every day, interviews and things of that nature. We try to address issues from a gospel perspective. We try to highlight leaders or churches that we think that should be known. We also have an arm where we're trying to develop leaders, and so that's been a real blessing. So all this has been going on for about 7 years.
Going through the website, I noticed there has been 2 conferences.
No, we've had 7.
Oh, you had 7.
Yeah.
Okay, I only saw 2. What happens at the conference?
So it's a yearly conference, but
Yes.
I believe the website probably only had the last 2.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, we've had conferences every year since the beginning, 7 years ago. And the conference is normally Friday and Saturday. We get great speakers, great music. This past year we had, I think, about 600 people come.
Wow.
And good seminar speakers. It is a time in which, so what we find is this: for the average Asian American,
Yes.
they listen to voices from across the country, whether it be John Piper or Tim
Yes.
Keller,
Yes.
great communicators, great thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a small disconnect contextually, culturally,
Yes.
between who Tim Keller is or John Piper is and who the average Korean American or Asian American young
Yes.
adult is. They love and they honor oftentimes the immigrant church and their pastors.
Right.
And they look at their parents oftentimes who pray fervently and such. But they also sense a little bit of a disconnect to who they are personally.
Right.
And so they're trying to figure out what kind of faith they should have, what kind of Christianity they should have.
Okay.
There's a side of them that says, you know, I love my Korean church, but there's a sense I don't think that's me.
Right.
I love John Piper, but that's not me either.
Right.
So who am I?
Right.
They're learning what it means to be a third culture person. Or a person on the margins, where they're neither Korean or American.
Right.
But what does it mean to be a Korean American or an Asian American Christian?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we still believe in the gospel, we still believe in the local church and such, but oftentimes the way that the church and the gospel is applied in our lives, it has to be applied in terms of the culture and context we live in.
Yes.
Same. And in order to give voice to that thought, etc., what we've experienced was a lot of Asian Americans as they're growing up, they want to hear speakers or be alongside of people who've gone ahead of them in that journey.
Right.
And so the Sola Conference, I think, gives that, where they could, for many of them, be in a room, 500-600 people. One of the first times they've been in a room with so many Asian Americans,
Right.
worshiping the same God, listening oftentimes to a speaker. Sometimes we get famous white speakers,
Right.
and that's good. But to see other Asian American leaders up on the stage speaking to them, and they realize, oh, I can relate to that person. That person's speaking the language that I understand in terms of my heart language or the context.
Right.
When they go into a seminar, they hear speakers in which they're addressing issues which is relevant to them.
Right.
So all of that, we've hopefully are developing a culture, a brand in which young emerging Asian Americans, when they're trying to figure out what does it mean for me to be a Christian, they can't so easily throw out the faith of their fathers or the faith of the majority church.
Right.
But also they can see this new brand called Sola, or the teachers or churches or people of influence, and understand, the gospel really does matter. The scripture is really without error.
Right.
The church really is a place where I need to belong to, etc. We're trying to reinforce all of that. We're trying to frame or influence an emerging generation with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
There's a couple of things that come to my mind, and that is, one is when you talk about it, maybe a mentoring is one picture, and then the second part is, how do you grow leaders to really lead, the people seeking those kind of answers? Does the SOLA address those issues in terms of growing the leadership or providing a mentor? Because the website for the SOLA, it talks about how it's gospel centered, but it's local church driven.
Right.
And so a lot of what you're saying, local church might not address to them,
Right.
particularly. So how do you balance that in terms of, because somebody might be a little bit disappointed when they go to their own church, the church is not addressing what they've heard at the SOLA conference, for
Right.
instance.
One of the things that we have determined is that we don't want to be a movement that works against the church.
Right.
And we've seen conferences or movement those are wonderful, well-intended, etc. But oftentimes what happens is that they begin to compete against the local church
Right.
in terms of resourcing, time, and things of that nature.
Right.
So we intentionally have made local church driven as one of our pillars.
Mm-hmm.
And the council is comprised of local church pastors, senior pastors. So they're not going to make decisions with the direction of SOLA that competes against the local church.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like an example of something that we're doing right now is a few months ago, we gathered 10 youth pastors from the area.
Okay.
And so they're all youth pastors working at one of the local churches here.
Okay.
We got them together at a beach house, a nice beach house, 3 days, 2 nights.
Mm-hmm.
They paid a nominal fee. We spent time together, and we had some mentor pastors.
Okay.
Min Chang, KJ
Okay.
Kim, I was there, Justin Kim from Bethel was there. We just spent time with them. We gave some talks, and we spent some time praying.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a wonderful time. And for a lot of these youth pastors, they were so encouraged
Right.
that their work and who they are were being validated.
Mm-hmm.
And not that they're immigrant senior pastors, and some of them are from immigrant churches, some of them are from independent churches. Not that those pastors are not valuing them,
Right.
but the fact that a group would spend the time and money, like KJ and Min, they flew out here from Chicago
Okay.
just to be here, to spend time with them, encouraging them, affirming them in their youth ministry.
Right.
I think was a real encouragement to them. And at the end, we said, you know what? What's God going to do through you? Because you are the ones, collectively, you can influence a whole generation of youth students.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you have in mind? What do you think God wants you to do? And so we let them alone, and they came up with a vision of what they potentially would want to do. And it was really exciting. And I believe that is an example of how younger leaders want to learn from and be influenced by. I think mentoring oftentimes can take one of two forms.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, mentoring could be like me sitting down with a younger person asking, hey, how are you doing? What's your calling? What's your vision? What are you struggling with? How's your marriage? Things of
Right,
that nature.
right.
And that's necessary. But another type of mentoring is Jesus would say to people, hey, follow me.
Right,
Come see what I'm doing.
right.
And oftentimes what younger leaders want to do is to belong, to know, just be a part of a movement.
Okay.
Where they can see older pastors, people who have gone ahead of them 10, 20 years older, and say, okay, if those leaders have walked that path in that way, I have a model, I have a template in which I can follow. And so I don't have to give up on the local church and things of that nature. And I think mentoring can take place in that way. I think we don't always have to take them away from their current local church
Right.
for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
In the Korean church,
Right.
it's a lot more difficult because I hate to say it, but sometimes it's a little bit more territorial.
Yes.
Can I
Yes.
say that?
Yes. Yes. I understand.
Yeah, and so and there's a concern, and I can kind of understand that. But for the younger generation, I think they're a little bit more open,
Okay.
and so they don't mind if their youth pastors go meet with other youth pastors,
Mm-hmm.
and getting influence from other leaders and the such. And so, yeah, I think some of those things are happening, and we're very grateful.
I'm a parent, and so as a parent, I speak with other parents, and most parents' concern about youth pastor is longevity. Usually, they see them come and go within 2-3 years, and so that was one of the complaints most parents have is that their child is growing, from first grade on, and 2-3 years later, they have a new pastor has different vision, different message, and then 2-3 years, and so sometimes kids growing up and they're a little bit confused because each pastor emphasizes different things. And so, is there something as a senior pastor you try to do, or you try to point out and say, we need to have this as longevity driven versus every 2-3 years we're getting a new, youth pastor?
Right. I think there are a few things. And I think if people have questions, they should talk to my youth pastor.
Right.
Chris Lee, he's Chinese American.
Okay.
He's a great, wonderful youth pastor. He's written several articles on SOLA as well as Rooted, Gospel Coalition. And I think among Asian American youth pastors, he's one of the best out there.
Okay.
He's been at our church 4.5, maybe 5 years now.
Okay.
And the things that I would tell him is I want you to, and he wrote an article one time and said it's not just youth ministry. That was his title, because he's seen so many people have that attitude. Well, it's just youth ministry. And I'm doing it until I can get to my real ministry or something to that effect.
Right, right.
And he wants people to stop thinking that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that churches can do is value youth pastors and children's pastors more.
Yes.
They oftentimes move on because they're treated that way.
Okay.
And the real power occurs only at the senior pastor level.
Okay.
And unfortunately, that's a part of the Korean culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of a lot of churches' culture. One of the ways you can not reinforce that poor culture is paying the youth pastor or children's pastor more.
Right.
And I think sometimes people underestimate how strategic a good children's pastor or youth pastor
Yes.
is, because really tithing comes from the parents.
Right, right.
And a lot of times parents choose churches according to if their kids.
Children, yes, yes.
That's their most valuable commodity.
Mm-hmm.
And so invest in the children's director, invest in the youth director. But having said that, there are not enough youth pastors to go around.
Okay.
You think about all the Korean churches just in the Southern California area, right? There's just not enough youth pastors.
Okay.
And so even if all the churches decided to pay all of them as much as they can, there's just not enough good youth pastors to go around. And so I think a lot of churches will have to be staffed by lay people, 평신도, or
Right.
집사님들. But what the churches can do is encourage them to network.
Right.
to invest in friendships with other people who are in youth ministries from other churches, to do ministry together at times, have combined youth retreats, for example.
Right.
And what that would do is that if a church has a small youth group of 10, 15 kids, I bet you that those 10, 15 kids are closer to each other
Yes.
than a large church with 150 youth kids.
Right.
And the way that we kind of look at it is that the youth ministry with 150 kids is superior to the youth ministry with 15 kids.
Yes. Yes.
But in reality, the 15 kids can experience an intimacy, more of a family. Even if they don't have a full-time youth pastor, they can grow. But what those 15 kids could really use is once in a while getting together with 200 kids.
Right.
And to remind them, although we might be a small church, the gospel is bigger than our church.
Right.
It's so much bigger.
Right.
And we not only have the advantage of the intimacy of our small church, but the strength and the power of the bigger church, with the capital C, occasionally to remind us of that.
Okay.
And so if churches can kind of release them to network and cooperate with other churches, it would maybe help with that.
Okay. Currently, I'm speaking with the Pastor Steve Chang of Senior Pastor, Living Hope Community Church. Going back to that point, I don't know, I mean, just as a psychological viewpoint, or when the opinions form within a child, usually it's third and fourth grade, they really develop their thought process for the rest of their life. And so I feel like that's the most important age that we should be paying attention. But in most churches, they think of them as just babysitting those age, and they just drop them off and they go. And then when the kids don't follow, or let's say they go away from parents in terms of what parent wants to do, they blame the church. And so I think that's really, really important, what you're saying in terms of paying attention to more to children's ministry and trying to have the longevity of, pastor for the children.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important. And I think even it happens at a younger age too. I think oftentimes, and I think most parents intuitively understand it. And most parents understand that it's important.
Yes.
But younger children will follow along and do whatever their parents tell them.
Right.
And one of the things that's been happening lately, and this is more so for the second generation,
Okay.
is a lot of second generation people have grown up as latchkey kids.
Yes.
Right? Their parents go off and work in the store, they're left alone, etc. Or those who are really involved at church, they go to 수요예배 and they're playing in the parking lot,
Right.
and things of that nature. And the parents, because of the disconnect with the majority culture, don't really participate in the kids' school life or
Right.
etc. And so what I've seen happen with the second generation parents is the pendulum has swung all the other way, and they insist that they have to be at their kids' every performance, every athletic endeavor, etc.
Right.
All-star, travel league, etc.
Right.
And so what happens is the same parents, the second-gen parents, who would never pull their kids out of school,
Right.
will pull them out of church,
Church. Yes.
at the drop of a hat,
Right.
so they can go perform or go to Disneyland, etc. And so this is what happens, Alex. And I'm sure you've seen it happen at times. Elementary age kid, a third, fourth grader, will
Right.
do whatever their parents tell them.
Right.
Today we're going to church.
Right.
Next week we're going to go to Disneyland.
Right.
The following week we're going to go on vacation. Oh yeah, we're going to go to church this week. Now,
Right.
the kids learn what? The church is only as important.
Secondary.
Right?
Right.
And so the kids who used to love going to church
Right.
learn just in their soul that it's not that important. When they get to junior high school, they begin to express that.
Right.
When they get to high school and they
Act out.
and they can drive, they say, I
Right.
want to go to church.
Right.
And it's in junior high school, by the way, that the parents start realizing, oh, my kid isn't as good as I thought they
They
are.
were.
So my kid's not going to be a professional baseball player.
Right.
And so all this time and money we've allocated, resourced into my child's endeavors, I realized, well, it was just for fun. But now in high school, they can drive on their own. They can go to parties. They can do whatever things they want. Now the parents are saying, oh, no, you need to go to church. The kids are
Right.
saying, no, I don't want to go to church. And the parents have lost the credibility of trying to tell their child that church is important. So,
Right.
I don't know. That's one of my little soapbox things.
Uh-huh. How do you address that to the parents, though? I mean, um, I've experienced the same thing, and I've expressed that to the parents. But as a senior pastor of a church, how do you express that to the second generation parents right now?
I get guest speakers to come and speak.
Okay, you don't tell them directly.
I had a friend of mine, Owen Lee from Virginia.
Okay,
He came and spoke, and he did an amazing job. And people should listen. And afterwards, the parents were all looking down in the ground. And they didn't want to make eye contact. No, but I mean, I understand what the parents are feeling and thinking. But but this is one aspect of the issue.
right,
The other aspect, and from the question that you asked earlier, parents do value their kids.
Right.
Most parents really do believe that spiritual education, the faith of their kids is important. One of the things that I say, I was teaching a baby dedication class, and I made this point: if your child entered junior high school and was in a geometry class, but they're not learning geometry because the teacher was so incompetent, what would you do as a parent? And most parents would say, well, if they happen to have a really incompetent teacher, I would try to talk to the principal, get them out of that class, or if worse comes to worse, I would tutor them or get them a tutor.
right,
The bottom line is the parents would take personal responsibility of the spiritual education of their kids,
right,
right?
right,
Even if that means they can't change circumstances or environment, they would take personal responsibility. Parents normally don't take personal responsibility of the spiritual welfare of their kids.
right,
They give it to the church and say, well, you're not doing your job.
right,
And I think that's a fundamental thing that parents can do.
right. Recently, I heard a pastor give a message, and he said something that really made me off guard, and that really made me think about my past. And that is, Korean parents, they love tutors, whether it's math or geometry or whatever it is. They get the tutors and help the kids, to do better. And he said, you should have tutor for Bible. And he said, when he told that to one of his church members, that you should have a tutor for child in the Bible, and the parents said, why?
Right, right.
And so in that message, and he's kind of said it in a jokingly manner, but still it made me really think. I said, that's true. I've never heard of anybody have a tutor for the Bible.
Yeah, I think just inherently we don't value spiritual education as much.
Right,
And
right.
It's unfortunate, and we're all guilty. I am guilty of it too.
Because ultimately, who we are in terms of our faith and in terms of where we go, and today's society is very confusing. A lot of issues, whether you're left or right, or whether you're conservative or not conservative. Still, there should be a real strong faith base in yourself, so that you can find out who you are and what direction you need to go.
Right.
And that can only come from really, education, and also learning, and having mentors, and
Right.
having a good home church.
Right, and I think parents will teach who they are, not what they say.
Right.
And children, although oftentimes they may seem rebellious at times, they'll learn from their parents
Right.
and what the parents really value. I think that our previous generation of parents, they did a wonderful job living out the Christian faith commitment the best that they can. And the second generation, a lot of second generation that I know, they may no longer attend the Korean church,
Right.
but there's this deep spiritual commitment that they've learned from
Korean
watching
church.
their parents. Yeah.
Right.
And so I think sometimes just because they've left the Korean church doesn't mean they've left the church or Christ. All that they've done, I think God used. I think for the second generation, the kind of people who might listen to this program, they may look at the first generation saying, well, they failed, so I'm not going to do that. That's why I'm going to get really involved with my kids' lives and take them to Little League on Sunday. And I think they're making a grave mistake. Our children are watching and learning from what we value.
Yes.
And if we love God and are committed to God, that's what they'll learn.
Right. Right. Now, as a senior pastor of Living Hope, do you consider that to be a Korean second-generation church, or do you consider Living Hope to be multi-ethnic church, or do you have a label for it, or?
It's a question that we wrestled with about 10, 15 years ago.
Okay.
Are we an Asian American church, a Korean American church, or multi-ethnic church?
Right.
Our conclusion was we're none of those.
Okay.
We're not a Korean American or an Asian American church because we don't label ourselves in that way. We
Right.
don't do anything that's that specific.
Mm-hmm.
I can preach in Korean, and there have been times in the history of our church where people have encouraged me, why don't we start a Korean service, or even speak bilingually at times.
Right. Right.
And I've always rejected, and the reason being is that there are plenty of good Korean churches.
Right.
Right across our street is Nachimban Gyoe.
Right.
If you're looking for a good Korean church, go there.
Right.
We don't need to start another Korean church. What our generation needed were independent churches
Right.
that Korean Americans can bring non-Korean Americans to.
Right. Right.
We don't classify ourselves as an Asian American church, but we don't also advertise ourselves as multi-ethnic because the definition of multiracial or multi-ethnic, I don't know. We're close to that definition, but still, we don't have a lot of non-Asians.
Right.
And we are just who we are. And so what we say is, we're Christ Church, and whomever God brings, we're going to love them the best that we can.
Okay. What's the median age for your church right now? Because when I was looking through your website, I feel they're rather young age, the pastors and also the maybe elders or deacons within the church settings seems to be like normal Korean churches where when elder, you're talking about somebody that's 56 years old,
Right. Well, there are a couple of reasons because we're predominantly still Asian American.
Right.
And that generation is younger.
Right.
As a whole.
Yes.
And so, as a church, for example, we have probably about 100 kids in our youth group. And so if you think about their parents coming to our church, those are people in their 40s and 50s and plus. And so we have plenty of those people. Mm-hmm. But when you just kind of look, it does appear younger than a Korean church. And the average Korean church nowadays is aging in America.
Right, yes.
And so the average Korean church is older than the average Korean church 20 years ago.
Right.
And then there's another reason why we sometimes appear younger. In that Living Hope, we would appoint or elect people as deacons.
Right.
Who are much younger.
Right.
And we do that intentionally. And the average Korean church wouldn't have a 23-year-old deacon.
Right.
But we do that intentionally.
Oh, okay.
So that the younger people can represent the younger part of our church.
Right. Okay. Today I'm talking with Pastor Steve of Living Hope Community Church. I really want to thank him for coming in today, and we hope that he will be with us in the future programs. Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate your work.
K-Pastors Roundtable is a discussion program for today's English-speaking Koreans and Christians. We will discuss the current issues and important issues dealing with our community. Your participation is very important to us. You can send in your questions or comments via email kprt316@gmail.com. You can hear our program on AM 1190 in Southern California on Saturday and Sunday at 1:30 p.m. You can also find us on YouTube channel K-Pastors Round Table. Please join us. Thank you.